Hey gunfighters, recently been doing a truck gun series and I thought, some people might not be into that, and especially an entire series. Why not put out a good hunting episode? It's that time of year, and as I'm in northern Idaho, just elk hunting is on the brain, and I thought, why not recast an episode on the best elk cartridges? And then I realized when I went back to look that, hey, I've never done an episode on best elk cartridges. Major faux pas on my part. Forgive me this egregious wrong. Let's rectify it today. Come with me on this journey of best elk cartridges. Now, I normally put in my bio. I know many of you listen a lot and you get wary of hearing it every time. So I'll put in a very brief synopsis and more focus on hunting. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. That is first and foremost in everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. He's blessed me to do many things in life. Military, Marine Corps, combat veteran, urban warfare instructor, law enforcement, LAPD, private contractor, and for today, and I've done many other things, but for today especially, lifelong, since I was a boy, hunter, all over this beautiful country. I've been a professional big game hunter and guide, and yes, I have done quite a bit of elk hunting. That said, thinking about this and how I had never done it, I thought I would break it up into 3 distinct categories. That would be the old school, the best old school rifle cartridges for elk, the classics, the ones you might want to hunt with in a Jones hat and, plaid flannel shirt, blued steel and walnut rifle, the classics. And then the semi-wildcat, and I say semi-wildcat because a lot of these are commercially available, but they were started as a wildcat and very popular with hand loaders and just good semi-wildcat rounds. And then we're going to go to the new school of the new rounds that are available. What are some of the best elk cartridges? Best of all time, the boat. I know the term is supposed to be goat, but I don't like that term. Although I do like goat meat. It's some of my favorite meat. Peanut butter goat curry, delicious. Especially, well, anyway, enough of that. We're here to talk about elk and elk cartridges. The numero uno should come as no surprise. The best classic elk cartridge of all time is perhaps the best classic cartridge of all time, the 30-06. Been with us since 1906. To be technical, maybe 1903, but for simplicity, 30-06, 1906, a phenomenal elk cartridge, especially when you talk about that 180 and up grain range. It was good in days of yore. It's even better today. Why? Because propellant technology and bullet technology has gotten better. But there's nothing wrong with a 30-06 and 180 grain Remington core lock or something like it. The 30-06 is a phenomenal all-around North American cartridge. In fact, when I was going to Alaska and I was deciding on the one rifle to take for whatever I might run into, including coastal brown bears, I brought the 30-06. And I could have chosen anything. I wasn't necessarily looking for a classic historical cartridge. But I thought of the broad spectrum from black-tailed deer to big brown bear that might want to kill me. 30-06 was a good balance. And it's a good balance here, and it's a great elk cartridge. Some might argue that there was an improvement to the 30-06, and I say some might say, air quotes, that there was an improvement, unquote, to the 30-06 by necking it down to the .277 diameter. And to be technical, maybe it wasn't a 30-06, maybe it was a 30-03 because it has a longer case neck down. For practical purposes, let's say it's the .06 neck down to .277 caliber. The .270 Winchester, since the 1920s. I'm not looking it up right now, but if memory serves, since 1925. It's a phenomenal cartridge. Some might say it's underpowered for elk, but there are likely a lot of elk that have been consumed by human beings at the wrong end of a .270 that wouldn't argue with the .270's effectiveness. The .270 should say obviously, but people are in different places in their ballistics journey, so maybe not as obvious. It's going to have lighter bullets. It's a smaller caliber. You're talking generally the classic is 130 grain. You can go 140 grain, 150 grain. And there are heavier loadings if you get faster twist rate barrels and things like that. But for the classic, 130, 140 grain. I think sometimes people, especially that romanticize elk hunting, that don't live or haven't lived in the western states and done a lot of elk hunting, they romanticize these beasts as if they're wearing body armor and riding around in an armored personnel carrier. But they're not. It's essentially a very big cervid, a very big deer. Now, there are certain shot opportunities that I would not take with 130 grain 270 round. But for the vast majority of elk hunting, I would say it's sufficient. And it's a classic cartridge. I would generally tend towards the heavier side of those bullet weights, and I would especially take advantage of modern bullet construction, especially something like a solid copper monolithic. In these is just absolutely enough for elk. A good TSX or TTSX or terminal ascent bullet or a good modern construction bullet in the 270 is plenty for elk as long as you're not trying some kind of crazy shot, and you shouldn't be doing that with any caliber. 270 is absolutely, I think, enough for elk. And I think the sheer number of elk hunters out west that choose a 270 should land it squarely on the list of classic elk cartridges. I think those are going to be, I thought of a couple of others, but I think these are quintessentially the two classic elk cartridges I'm going to talk about. I was loosely saying classic in my mind as 1950s and before, and both those rounds fall well before that. Things like the 308 and the 300 Win Mag are after that. I'm not going to put them in the classic category. Now, let us move to the semi-wildcats, because I think there are a couple of best all-around, best of all time elk cartridges that fall in this category. And I think perhaps, bar none, the best all-around Western hunting caliber from a pure ballistics standpoint is, dun dun dun, the 280 Ackley improved. It is a phenomenal balance. Ironically, the original cartridge never really caught on, and I think that was just poor marketing, but the 280 Remington was a good cartridge. They tried to remarket it as a 7mm Remington Express, also didn't do well, and they went back to the 280 and it still didn't do well. But it's a good cartridge. But Ackley improved it. The 280 Ackley improved. And it is such a good balance of performance and efficiency. It rivals many of the modern new cartridges, and it did it a long time ago. The 280 Ackley improved is impressive. Impressive. As far as ballistics performance, it gets close to the 7mm Rem Mag, and it does it way more efficiently with far less powder, which means less ejecta-mass, which means less recoil, which is a great thing. Without all the getting beat up by a Magnum, without generally the need for the longer barrel, it just shy of big coastal brown bears. There is nothing that I wouldn't want that 280 to handle. There's nothing that I would feel undergunned with. Whether I was talking about mountain goat in Alaska, or bighorn sheep, or big muleys in the Sonoran Desert, or, as we're talking about today, a big 6x6 elk in the mountains of Colorado, or northern Idaho, or New Mexico. You know, that 280 is a beautiful balance to 7mm, especially, I said semi-wildcat, especially if you hand load. There are so many good projectiles for the 7mm. You can get really high ballistics coefficients if you want. You can get really good terminal performance. You can get really good efficiency out of that 280 Ackley improved without what I would call the waste of the inefficient Magnum. And I like the 7mm Rem Mag. I think for an off-the-shelf, you're just going to go to Walmart or a big box store and buy ammo, the 7 Rem Mag is probably a better choice. But for somebody that's really judicious about getting the proper ammo and or hand loading, the 280 Ackley Improved is a better cartridge. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If you're talking about just ballistics. Now, it might not be because of availability of ammo. and availability of rifles and the cost of those rifles and ammo. But just from a ballistic standpoint, yeah, it's awesome. And it's not hard to reload, 280 Ackley improved. And it's not hard because it's if you're not aware, instead of, we talked about the 270 necking it down to 277 caliber, 280 are roughly 7 millimeter. So it's a 7 millimeter bullet. It's a 30-06 neck down with some case dimension differences and different shoulder dimensions. But for the hand loader, 30-06 is one of the most common cases in that standard rifle length cartridge. So it's not hard if you're a hand loader. That's why I put it in the semi-wildcat. You can get it as a commercially available cartridge, and there's nothing wrong with doing so. But it really shines as that semi-wildcat. Another semi-wildcat, if you want a thumper of a round, if you want that elk hammer, I did a whole cartridge talk on this one episode. In fact, I think it's the #1 cartridge talk that I've ever done. And I think I entitled it something like the elk hammer or elk hammer. You might know what I'm talking about. What if you neck that classic 06 case up? You know, you don't always have to neck down. Sometimes you can neck up, go from the welterweight up to the heavyweight. The 35 Whelen, named after Townsend Whalen. Ironically, I don't think he made the cartridge. If I remember correctly, it was named after him, and I forget who actually designed it, but it was named after Townsend Whalen. There's a lot of history to that guy if you want to go research. But the 35 Whalen, whomever designed it, is a good heavy hitter for elk, especially if you do the kind of hunting that I like to do. Spot and stalk and still hunting. I generally will top my hunting rifles with an LPVO or a lower on the magnification end because I like to get in close. I'm not going to say I've never shot elk past 300 yards, but I will say the vast majority have been inside that. And for inside 300 yards, especially you're hunting the deep timber, the river bottoms. We often think, especially if you're back east, you often think of out west as really wide open, and it certainly can be. But there are many places like Old Timber Falls, areas that were logged out not that long ago, or big chunks of the Pacific Northwest, where elk hunting is down and dirty. It's up close and personal. And for that, the 35 Whelen is a fantastic elk cartridge. And much like the 280, you can get it commercially available. There's commercially loaded, so it's not a true wildcat. It's a semi-wildcat. Because you can get commercially available 35 Whelen. But in general, it's expensive. And there's not a lot of it commercially available. Like, you're probably not going to Walmart and finding 35 Whelen. Not that I'm saying you should buy your hunting ammo from Walmart, but just to give you an idea. But you can get it as a commercial load, but especially if you hand load, again, based off a 30-06 case, and that's really, there's not a lot of other changes, so it's super easy to hand load for. It's going to be fairly affordable to hand load for. Unlike 7mm, there's not a plethora of 35 caliber options, but there's plenty of good options to choose from for elk. And again, if you want that 300 yards and in heavy hitter, that 35 Whelen packs a wallop. Talking about you want to move up to heavier bullets. Now the 06, which I have quite a bit of, the 220 grain, which is heavy for an 06, and I like that. That's one of the reasons I like the 06 for big game hunting, especially if I'm spot and stalk and still hunting. I like that 180 to 220 grain, but that's where it tops out. The 35 Whelen, you get a much heavier bullet. You can get much heavier bullets if you choose to do so. And if you're the big, heavy, moderate velocity bullet guy, and I'd say for elk that's not a bad thing, the 35 Whelen may just be your thing. Do what you want to do. But those are going to be the top semi-wildcat rounds. Now let's start with what I would call modern rounds. And by modern, again, I think like after 1950. The first one that comes to mind is the 7mm Rem Mag. Like I said, you may decide you want this over the 280 Ackley Improved. It's not as efficient, in my opinion. There's quite a bit of waste in it. There's extra recoil that I don't think is necessary. But it's a fantastic all-around North American game round. It is fantastic. Because it's a 7mm, the recoil is not horrible for a Magnum. I just said it's got more recoil than the 280, and it certainly does. All other things being equal, because it's not as efficient. You get more ejecta mass. You have to add the weight of the propellant. There's a lot that goes into felt recoil that's more of an art than a science, but it's not brutal, especially for a hunting rifle where you're going to shoot a few rounds. It's not a great target rifle, in my opinion. In a hunting weight rifle, we're going to go and shoot 20 to 50 rounds for training or something in a day. But for a couple of rounds to zero and a couple of rounds for hunting, the recoil is not... If you're accustomed to modern centerfire rifles, and I'm not talking like an AR-15, which has very little recoil. I'm talking about traditional hunting rifles and 308, 30-06. The recoil is not crazy. And you get higher velocities. You get that 7mm bullet diameter, which is a great balance. It's a great elk cartridge. Probably one of the top ones used for elk. It is a phenomenal elk cartridge. Again, with the elk, I like to tend towards the heavier grain weight if we're not talking about solid copper. Solid copper monoliths are their own beast. They play by their own rules. But I would, if it's not solid copper monolithic, I would tend towards a good bonded bullet because you're driving at crazy high velocities. And I would tend towards heavier. That's just me. By heavier, I just mean like 150 grains or more in the 7mm Rem mag. For elk. It's a good elk cartridge. It's a good all-around Western cartridge, right? It's good for many things. That 7mm Rem mag. Now there's also the 300 Win Mag. The 300 Win Mag, I think is too much for elk. I'm just going to be honest. Can you use it for elk? Sure. Sure, you can. But if I was picking between the 300 Win Mag and the 7 Rem Mag for elk, I'd pick the 7 Rem Mag every time. If you're saying you might want to hunt something else, you could skew that data and look at the 300 Win Mag. But if we're talking about elk hunting in most of the western states, I would pick the 7 over the 300 Win Mag. Although there are plenty of people that love the 300 Win Mag, I'm just going to give it an honorable mention here. And if I think that's more than is necessary, I obviously think the 338 is more than is necessary. But if you like it, go for it. I should mention there is another Wildcat, the 338-06, which you might look at. But if I was looking in that bigger bore necked up, I would look at the 35 Whelen. But I'll give it an honorable mention here as well. Now, there are plenty of ultra-modern cartridges. I don't know that many of them would deserve any spot on this list as far as best of all time. But there's two I'm going to mention. The first one is the 270 Wisdom. The 270 Winchester short mag. All the things mentioned about the 270, but in a more modern style, that short, fat powder column, which generally is more efficient. If you look at the numbers, if we agree, and you may disagree, that the 270 is enough, the 270 Wisdom is kind of a modern, more efficient version of that. You get it in a short action if you care about that. So it does offer some advantages, and obviously the 270 is proven. So if you want the 270 Wisdom, it's kind of a shoe-in. And you might think, since I was hard on the 300 Win Mag, I wouldn't be hip on this next one, but I'm more hip on this one than the original 300 Winchester Magnum. The 300 Wisdom Winchester Short Magnum. I would call this an ultra modern, and it's more efficient. So if I were choosing between the old classic 300 Win Mag and the 300 Wisdom, I would choose the Winchester Short Mag. It's not super obscure. It's not as probably as common on shelves as a 300 Win Mag, but it's not hard to get. It's not even hard to get compared to like a 35 Whelen. A lot of places are probably going to have, especially a lot of places that have elk, are going to have 300 Winchester Short Mag. Much like the 270 Wisdom, it's efficient. Because it's using less powder, you're going to have less recoil than the 300 Win Mag. All other things being equal, and they're generally not. You're going to get that short action. I don't put as much stock into that as a lot of other people. I think if you're running a bolt really hard and really fast, the difference between a long and a short action is negligible. And this next one has not been around long enough to be proven. But it's, of all the cartridges that have come out, and those last ones that I'd call ultra modern, they came out right around the millennium, right around the Y2K debacle, right? This next one is way more modern. So modern that I don't know if it's proven yet, but it has some legs to it. It has some promise. I'm going to give it an honorable mention. The 7mm PRC. Now, I mentioned the attributes of the 280 Ackley Improved being efficient, and I mentioned the attributes of the 7mm Rem Mag, proven elk cartridge. There's no reason from a ballistic standpoint, and especially if you're into the super long range shooting, which is not my style, but there's no reason you couldn't do traditional hunting with it too. If you think of that modern philosophy that really started mainstream with the 6.5 Creedmoor, you make the case actually a little bit shorter so you can load longer, heavier for caliber bullets. Which, again, I like heavy bullets for elk, especially if we're talking the smaller calibers, small-ish calibers for elk like the 7mm. The 7mm PRC looks promising because there's a wide, if you have the faster twist barrel, the longer, heavier bullets, especially if you're hand loading, there's no reason you can't use the classic good elk bullets. But you could also go heavier if you want to. It's a very efficient case. It was designed to be efficient. Right, so there's nothing wrong from that standpoint. The vast majority of cartridges that are introduced year per year, only a fraction of them actually become mainstream and popular. The 6.5 Creedmoor obviously did that. It's not on this list. You can't shoot elk with it, but I wouldn't put it on the best of all time for elk cartridges. The 7mm PRC, again, it's not proven, but it has the potential. The potential is there. I see nothing philosophically wrong with the 7 PRC for a great elk cartridge. And maybe it will become one of the best of all time. With that, again, please forgive that egregious error of never doing in the past, in the 6-ish years of podcasting, best elk cartridges. So here you go. Now, I'm going to plug Patreon. If you like this content, if this is your first rodeo, maybe just scroll down, like, subscribe, hit some stars, make sure you're following the show or whatever the vernacular is. I'd appreciate that. If this is not your first rodeo and you enjoy the show, consider becoming a patron. There's a lot of really cool patron-only insider content, so the insider chat. I've also, for patrons when they ask, I've helped virtually plan hunts for them. Again, I've been a professional big game hunter and guide. They'll literally send me a map of the area and I'll look at it and decipher it as best I can and try and give them a hunting plan. If that's not worth $1, right? You can become a patron for $1. If that's not worth it, I don't know what is. You know what a guide costs? And I'm here to serve you guys. But hopefully you see the value in it and you consider becoming a patron. If you want to become a patron, for any of those reasons, but primarily hopefully because you want to support the show, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes. Scroll down, Patreon link, hit it. It'll take you to the Patreon page for as little as $1. You don't like what's on Patreon, you can cancel. You'll be out $1. And a lot of patrons, I'm humbled that they join and then they end up giving more without me asking, without giving them any special treatment. They give more because they see the value in it. And that says something. That's very humbling. Anyway, scroll down, hit the Patreon link. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Tactical tip of the day. You know what's really good? Roasting and eating the heart of a beast that you have slain. I enjoy that. I don't make any apologies for it. Give you a good recipe for roast beast. Heart. Now, there's nothing crazy about a heart. It's just a muscle as far as cooking it goes. There's nothing off-putting about it other than the look. And if the look bothers you, think probably with an elk heart anyway, unlike a deer heart, you're probably going to want to cut it into small pieces. But heart, cut thin. Now, if you're in the backcountry, there's nothing wrong with putting it on a stick and roasting it over a fire. I enjoy heart. I enjoy liver. But let's stick with heart for now. If you bring the heart back and you have a little bit more infrastructure to cook it, a nice searing hot pan with some peanut oil. Cut that heart up into cubes, let's say no more than 1 inch thick. You drop it in the hot pan for just a little bit. As soon as it starts to change color, turn it over. Don't overcook it. Many people overcook wild game. If you overcook it, it's going to get hard and rubbery and not as good. Drop it in there. I'm talking very quickly. You're going to see it start to change color. When it starts even beginning to change color towards the middle, flip it over, watch for the same thing again, and then take it off. It's done. Add a little bit of taco seasoning, and then whatever spices you want to your level. I like really spicy stuff. My wife and I eat a lot of ghost pepper, Carolina Reaper, whatever you might want. Since you already have the peanut oil, you can mix some of that taco seasoning. A lot of times it comes in a packet. You can mix it, a little bit of that oil since it's already hot with that seasoning, and make like a little drizzle and put it over the heart. And then add your ghost pepper, your Carolina Reaper, your crushed red pepper, whatever level of spice that you want, or no spice. But here's a good tip inside of a tip. Don't add the ghost pepper while you're cooking it. You'll probably regret it. Add the ghost pepper at the end. It's just phenomenal. If you want to class it up a little bit, if it's for a party or trying to get a lady to eat it, put it on like a cracked pepper and olive oil Triscuit with a little piece of cheese, maybe a little leaf of cilantro on top. Tell them it's elk, because it is. It's amazing. It's delicious. As long as you don't overcook it and you serve it warm, it's really, really good. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Hopefully you got your mouth watering for some elk. It's a great animal to eat. Hopefully what you've been waiting for most on the episode, in every episode, the tactical verse of the day. If you're new here, we do a tactical verse on most episodes. Not every, but most. From Psalm 90. And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Whatever you get in life, whatever you achieve, God is the blesser. God is the giver. What do you have that you did not first receive? Right? What do you have that you didn't get from God? You couldn't draw another breath if it wasn't for God. If it wasn't for His grace, His unmerited favor, you would have nothing, including life itself. You have life because He gave it to you. Whatever you have in life is because He gives it to you and allows you to have it. If it's anything good, it came from God. Remember that. And hopefully remember that when you're standing on the side of a mountain over an elk that you get and are blessed with to make you stronger and your family stronger by providing food. But that elk exists because God allowed it to exist. And you exist because God allows it and because He loves you. Let us never forget what's really important. It's not the elk, it's not the rifle, it's Almighty God and your relationship with Him. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.